Welcome to the chaos sector. If the Linda Lane surveillance has been edited to show a white Hyundai Elantra, and Gray Hughes goes on court TV and claims that's Kohberger circling around those apartments, is that Linda Lane surveillance key in the investigation? Better yet, is it key even if he didn't go on court TV? Some have claimed the Linda Lane surveillance is irrelevant. Some have stated, we should move on and don't engage in, quote, YouTube drama. First of all, we are not true crime investigators. We've mentioned that before. So please do not expect us to follow a standard you have for the true crime community. We don't follow your standards of what should be focused on, what should be talked about or investigated. We address what we feel needs to be addressed. Now, don't run off the hill with that. We do acknowledge information and statements that many provide. But to the point about this investigation, the interrogation of get a clue is actually very important. It's like many don't realize the impact that some people have or may have in the investigation and even the trial. Going back to the claims that the Linda Lane surveillance is irrelevant. If the murders happened approximately around 3 a.m., and there is surveillance leaked out from an apartment complex near the victim's home, that not only makes it relevant, it also has visual and audio evidence in it. So how can anyone who is claiming to hope those victims receive the justice they deserve could claim the Linda Lane surveillance is irrelevant? Let me guess, you want to sweep that under the rug because the chaos has shown it has been edited? And we broke down that the audio evidence of violence occurred prior to the alleged Kohberger's arrival. Oh, now it's irrelevant. Oh, but if we were on the other side of the table claiming to spot Kohberger's vehicle circling, it would be the most important evidence in the case. Yeah, see, we expose any and everyone. We are done with the investigation. So for those who only subscribed for only that, well, I guess you should either get used to the chaos sector and what we expose, or find another true crime channel to follow. No offense, but we do not operate by anyone's standards. We know what we're doing, and we know what needs to be addressed. Many forget that our seniors already did the heavy lifting in this case. They exposed the frame, and to be honest, we can say our investigation has stapled that theory on the wall with strong evidence. Many forget the hard work. Heck, perhaps the chaos is responsible for the hashtag #FreeKohberger. I mean, our impact in this case hasn't been a fluke. And trust me, the prosecution, the defense, the families, and those traitorous DC agents all keep tabs on the true crime community. Did we not address Dylan's affidavit? Did we not address the physical setting of the lone killer entering that home? Did we not address the likelihood that there were multiple killers who entered the home on foot? That's for those thinking we hadn't addressed that. And this is the point. You have to go back and realize how far we have come. Did we not address the next morning and the obvious deception of how everything panned out before and during the 911 call? Did we not address WSU Kim and her claims and students who spoke about that night? Did we not address Kaylee's friend claiming to know Kaylee was harmed around 10 a.m. when the reports claimed the bodies weren't discovered until approximately 2 hours later? This meant they knew about the murders, people, which we broke down, and if they knew about the murders earlier than what was reported, then everything is subject to being known prior to sunrise. Did we not address the mainstream media's claims of Kohberger stalking those girls? Did we not address the propaganda they pushed? Did we not address Dot's claims, who many have claimed to debunk? How do we know these individuals aren't college students trying to debunk her because she's telling the truth? Oh, nobody ever thought about that. Did we not address the audio from the neighbor's camera, which many claimed was fake? Yet, if the reports claim it heard faint noises from inside the house, surely it heard a lot more loud noise. And if the mainstream media news comes out and claims it was fake, then more than likely, it's real. Did we not address Jack's warnings to the girls? Did we not address Bonnie and Clyde's involvement? Did we not address Bethany's exculpatory evidence that the prosecution desperately wanted to silence her about? Did we not address the so-called private driver? Did we not address the so-called DoorDash driver? Did we not address the gas station clerk? Did we not address Maddie's black coat being found by the detective, in which he tried to conceal it from the cameras? Did we not address the red Mustang crashed and abandoned? Did we not address the white Hyundai Elantra crashed and abandoned? Did we not address the lack of surveillance footage claimed to spot Kohberger driving in the neighborhood? Once again, this is why the Linda Lane surveillance is so important, because it's the only surveillance the public has seen regarding that night. And trust me, this will be used against Koberger. And Ann Taylor has to be ready to fight against this. Because a certain individual, had to cough, traced an outline of this vehicle, which matches the description of the defendant, and it's there aligned with the timestamp of Koberger's path. This surveillance is more important than many could imagine, apparently. Did we not expose the knife sheath being planted in the home and the DNA being planted on that knife sheath? Did we not address the prosecution, failing to provide the defense the identities of the 3 additional male DNA samples discovered at that home? Did we not expose the FBI tracking Koberger before the DNA even came back? And the reason they were tracking Koberger is because Batman gave his vehicle up to WSU campus police? Did we not expose how Moscow PD claimed to not have a make and model of the suspect's vehicle until December 7th, yet already had the make and model on November 29th from WSU campus police? I mean, I can keep going. Speaking of evidential analysis, we already did this early on in the case. Of course, theories will come about after collecting all the evidence and information. And since our evidential analysis resulted in the theory that Koberger had been framed, which Get a Clue basically alludes to in a lot of his content, every theory or sub-theory we present is centered around that frame. But, we have wild and unfounded claims based on speculations. What else can we possibly do in the investigation? It's our conclusion that Koberger was framed. In connection to the aforementioned shady business, look at the fuckery there. Moscow PD claimed on December 7th they were searching for a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra, but on November 29th, they obtained a later model. Guess which one? That's right, a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra by WSU campus police. Now, if they obtained this model, why would they be searching for a 2011 to 2013 model? Oh, because the FBI identified that model. The so-called FBI expert identified it, right? Oh, the fuckery is bananas. Where is the search for a white Hyundai Elantra coming from on November 29th, you ask? It would have to be from, drumroll, the FBI expert. Because Moscow PD stated they couldn't identify the vehicle in the Linda Lane surveillance, they stated it was a, quote, light-colored car. We can easily say that was bullshit, but follow the fuckery even still. If this were the case, then the so-called FBI expert had to be notified about the 2015 white Hyundai Elantra on November 29th, right? Guess what happens to the 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra? It vanishes into thin air. And you want to know why it vanished into thin air? Because the FBI already had a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra on November 29th. Mind you, Moscow PD sent out their press release December 7th, searching for a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra. But both Moscow PD and the FBI already had a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra on November 29th, meaning they were searching for this vehicle, but the press release for the specific make and model didn't come out until about a week later. We checked those press releases from November 15th all the way up until December 7th. And on November 29th, when they obtained the 2015 white Hyundai Elantra from WSU campus police, there was never a press release identifying this vehicle, let alone a vehicle in general. Well, of course, they couldn't have a press release identifying a vehicle because they had to build the frame first. Think about this in retrospect. If Koberger was guilty, then it would have been a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra spotted by the so-called FBI expert right off the bat. Moscow PD has their press release identifying the suspect's vehicle as a 2011 to 2016 white Hyundai Elantra, you see? And then the November 29th identification of his vehicle by WSU campus police would make sense. But because he was framed, they pretended to not have a vehicle or person of interest. It was only until December 7th all of this came about. Let all of that sink in. You see what I'm talking about? We've been over all this shit already. But since the vehicle was already being searched for, we can suggest that vehicle was pointed out by Batman a week prior, or even soon after the murders. But Get a Clue claims the FBI identified this vehicle. Yet how could they identify this vehicle when they changed it to a 2011 to 2016 model after obtaining Koberger's model? Yeah, that's how that would happen. But it couldn't happen that way, because the so-called FBI expert would identify the differences between the models, like Get a Clue claimed, right? So the 2011 to 2013 model never existed.
Hold on, let's make sure everyone understands that. Moscow PD obtained the Linda Lane surveillance from the landlord on November 14th, or 15th. Doesn't matter which day it was in context. They described the vehicle spotted as a, quote, light-colored car. Okay, briefly, let's present a wild speculation, as Get a Clue would say. In that TikTok video, the woman states that the landlord was scammed into giving up the surveillance to some woman, right? Now, for this landlord to be, quote, scammed into giving up the surveillance, that woman had to have some type of credentials that convinced them to give it up. Perhaps Tracy Walder, who has been vocal in this case. She is a former FBI special agent, you know? This would give her so-called clearance, pretending to be an investigator on the case. She could be that woman, and she is a former FBI special agent. And she also is a former CIA agent. She has a book called The Unexpected Spy. And of course, being quite prissy, you wouldn't expect her to be a spy. And apparently, get this, she was also in a, wait for it, a sorority. There are a lot of ways for her to slither around, it seems, and you definitely wouldn't expect her to be involved in this case behind the scenes. Or how about Jennifer Coffindaffer, a former FBI agent who has never had the optimism Walder had? Jennifer relentlessly attacked Kohberger, even insulted him personally. I believe she said something like Kohberger was an incel, with a perverted hatred towards women. Now, how in the hell did she come up with that analysis without any evidence that was proven of this? Creating that negative image is aligned with plotting to place his vehicle in that surveillance. She has that look of betrayal, that look of not giving a single shit about someone being sentenced to the death penalty. Do you see those evil, glaring eyes? They remind me of another old hag, Nancy Grace. Sick, demented, and just flat-out wicked women who actually hate men. That's why it's so easy to slander Kohberger. Comparing, we could suggest Coffindaffer, which doesn't sound like a real name. Remember, these are FBI agents. We can suggest that Coffindaffer was the one behind the scenes plotting to obtain that surveillance. And of course, she would be cleared by her former employer, the FBI, as she would be so-called investigating independently on the case. But don't let the girly looks fool you. Walder's innocent glare is why she was successful as a spy. The point here, who else would just be given surveillance footage involving a massacre, if not someone who had credentials to obtain it? But let's get back to the point. Although that is linked to the point, Moscow PD hadn't publicly reported that they had a make and model of the suspect's vehicle until December 7th. But if we go based on this press release, then would Get a Clue, or anyone else, suggests that it was during this time frame the so-called FBI expert spotted a 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra, which led to that make and model being publicly released December 7th. If so, then we have a very disturbing predicament, because not only did Moscow PD have a 2015 model before this date, being November 29th, we also know the so-called FBI expert also had that same model before that date. So why did they report it was a 2011 to 2013 model? Yet, the very vehicle they identified on November 29th, being a 2015 model and being Kohberger's, end up tracking that vehicle and arresting him for the murders? Well, there was never a 2011 to 2013 model, because they already had the model, which they ended up arresting for the murders. This is what we challenge Get a Clue about. Mind you, once Kohberger's vehicle was identified on November 29th, Moscow PD visited those apartments, obtained surveillance footage from those apartments, and concealed all of this from their press conferences. It was only until December 7th that they publicly identified a make and model of the suspect, or quote, person of interest. But behind closed doors, they already had the suspect. And once again, we broke this down without even adding the FBI into the equation. How could Moscow PD pretend they had just obtained a make and model on December 7th when they already had a make and model, November 29th? And that gets even deeper, because how did WSU Campus Police even know to search for a make and model before Moscow PD publicly released that make and model on December 7th? Oh yeah, it'll make your head spin. We'll stop right there, so you won't get dizzy. Simply put, all of the oddities prove that Kohberger was framed, and they had to pretend to gradually track down a make and model, which led to Kohberger. I mean, we've broken this down time and time again. There's not much else to say.
I want to go back to the element of these femme fatales who may have been the source of leaking that surveillance. Out of the two, it's hard to tell who would have lurked around near that crime scene asking the landlord for the footage. On one hand, the witch in Coffindaffer is the obvious choice, but the deception of Walder's innocent girl persona could also be used to pull that off. Also, don't be fooled by all of these so-called former FBI agents. Some of them, if not all, to be honest, are still FBI agents. They just become so-called mainstream media FBI agents. You know, the ones covering high-profile cases, voicing their opinions on news segments. Putting it into that perspective, the landlord was actually approached by a FBI agent or FBI special agent who investigates video footage, obtains it, and then, of course, is depicted as a former FBI agent in the mainstream media.
Maybe that's the so-called FBI expert who identified a white Hyundai Elantra. They never identified this individual, and that means they're considered anonymous. But why would they be anonymous? They work for the... Oh yeah, that's right, forgot who I was talking about.
Exactly. The same with all those so-called sources that made all of those claims, such as Kohberger stalked those girls. Sources claim there is surveillance of him in that neighborhood 12 times prior, or he had broken into his friend's home prior to the murders. I mean, all of this had been considered evidence by the mainstream media, yet none of it has been proven. Easy for a FBI special agent to lurk around in the shadows and be considered the, quote, anonymous source providing so-called evidence to the mainstream media to report on. You would never know that Elvira was still a FBI agent. That would be Jennifer's nickname. The point here is that someone in law enforcement or former agent on either level got that surveillance from the landlord. And as we mentioned, the bridge between the federal government, local and state authority, and social media included individuals within the true crime community. It's obvious. That's the only way it can be leaked out. There has to be a bridge to distribute the surveillance to the true crime community to examine. Once again, this Linda Lane surveillance was never officially released. It was leaked out, and the reason it was leaked out instead of officially released is because if it were officially released, then they would also have to officially release the neighbor's security footage. And as you should know by now, why we think it's never been officially released. You guessed it, because there was never a white Hyundai Elantra spotted by that camera. And of course, where in the hell does the white Hyundai Elantra in the Linda Lane surveillance come from? I guess like get a clue claims with the alleged suspect's vehicle in how it vanished into thin air to where they couldn't track it down, right? It just, popped up. It teleported to the back of those apartments. You see? And that's why the Linda Lane surveillance is more important than you think. They don't grasp how important that surveillance is in the trial. Again, the alleged suspect's vehicle was not a 2011 to 2013 model because the FBI and Moscow PD already had a 2015 model prior to the December 7th press release of that 2011 to 2013 model. I don't think our audience really grasps the work that we're doing here. We simulated how detectives were supposed to investigate the case. We took you through the crime scene, breaking everything down. The Killing Silence series was basically the end of our investigation. We even displayed evidence of the Linda Lane footage being edited. What else are you guys expecting from us? To point out the killers directly? You're not going to get that. I think you've gotten a bit spoiled in how you have expectations and standards for others. You view content for months, and with a few videos, you're already complaining and saying you'll unsubscribe? That is fickle, and we do not want that type of energy around, because it shows you're quick to flip-flop when things aren't going your way. I repeat, your way.
That's a good point. I want to reiterate the issue from the top. Nobody can tell us how to investigate, nor what we investigate. It's very selfish to demand that content creators, true crime commentators, true crime investigators, anyone for that matter, follow a certain standard or expectation of how to go about an investigation. Now they would say, well, you're being selfish in focusing on a content creator when you claim it's about getting justice for those victims. Well, justice is something the courts will serve. Our job is to investigate, and there are always elements of, quote, external components that are linked to an investigation, meaning it's not just about focusing on one thing or two things. There are several things you have to deal with. So once again, we know what we're doing. There is no need to tell the chaos what to focus on. Many go out of their way to present content to their audience. Perhaps sometimes they could wait due to personal circumstances, but they present it anyway because they want to share their content with that audience and receive feedback. There are so many dynamics that individuals are overlooking or even disregarding. Many have stated we've gone off the deep end, becoming obsessed with attacking other content creators. The problem with that perspective is, do you know if that has an impact on the case? Of course not. Yet the chaos may detect something that reveals that it has an impact. But the thing is, you don't determine what the chaos looks into. If we feel it is important to the case and our investigation, then we will address it. And if it takes 10 videos to drive it home, then so be it. Now, that may sound like we're being a bit snarky, but you're creating a narrative that somehow we're disregarding the investigation. It's all relative, my friend. You may not like it, but everything we address is relevant to the investigation, the case, and even the trial. So, I just wanted to kind of put a lid on that whistling noise.
And before someone responds in saying, oh, you're saying no one can tell the chaos how to investigate, but you're trying to tell others, like get a clue how to investigate, is being a hypocrite. Yeah, sounds good, but is completely wrong. We are not telling anyone how to investigate. We are questioning the claims of their investigative work. It started with a question about vehicles claimed to be spotted, and we simply presented our concerns about that claim. The response, and several statements, led to a question of integrity. The same way the audience can voice their opinions and critique the chaos, we're doing the same with other content creators. And once again, this is not true crime content creator drama, nor bullying, nor harassment. We have come to the conclusion with everyone we have addressed, these individuals are conspirators. That is a detriment to the justice you all are seeking, yet you don't care about that. But the actual investigators do care about that. But as the saying goes, you can't please everyone, I guess. Yet, I think you guys who are complaining should perhaps go back over the chaos episodes and others who have dedicated so much time and effort into investigating this case. It's clear that you all forget that and have become too comfortable in expecting things to pan out like you want. Anyone who has followed the chaos and not just stopping by, would know our primary investigation is over. We also pointed out that the trial would be slow-moving due to the frame. It's going to be a bunch of rescheduling, motions filed, motions heard, motions denied, more motions filed, more motions heard, and more motions denied. We already pointed that out. While this was obvious and was happening, we were investigating outside of the court proceedings because we already knew how that would play out. In general, there isn't much for anyone to break down in the case, for the true crime community anyway. I will say this, as we pointed out many times, there will be several testimonies, and despite the claims that the survivors won't be summoned to testify, the prosecution actually may want to shy away from Dylan's testimony for obvious reasons. The defense will attempt to reach out to Bethany one last time for her alleged exculpatory testimony. There is a difference in accounts, which obviously changes the setting at the home between the two survivors. So while everyone is running around claiming we aren't focused on the case, we're focused on the case. Many have forgotten the defense stated that Bethany has exculpatory evidence, and just like the prosecution is playing hide and seek with their evidence against the defendant, the defense is playing the same game. The question is, who actually has the evidence that determines the verdict? Both are claiming they have evidence to rule in their favor. I would say this, for that Linda Lane surveillance to be leaked out, which wasn't officially released by the authorities, it indicates that that side jumped the gun trying to convince the public Kohberger was guilty, but it had to be from some law enforcement source, and that means they couldn't bear the staring game anymore. They blinked first. But the crazy thing is the prosecution is in a catch-22, kind of like with Dylan's testimony. If the prosecution intends on using the Linda Lane surveillance, which has been leaked out, and many have so-called identified a white Hyundai Elantra, then the neighbor's security camera footage would also have to be examined. And get a load of that insanity, because at no point would there be a white Hyundai Elantra spotted entering that neighborhood. Wait, how can we say that? Because that footage has never been leaked out, because the conspirators couldn't edit it to display a white Hyundai Elantra like they did with the Ford Fusion in the Linda Lane surveillance. Yep, we've come to the conclusion it's a Ford Fusion. After all, someone claims a Ford Fusion was there at 4:07 a.m. Where is that vehicle being identified in the surveillance? Because it's going away from the highest visible region. It was the same vehicle creeping up, that's where. And this is another reason the neighbor's security camera footage hasn't been leaked, because you would spot the Ford Fusion entering the neighborhood. Definitely can't show that to the public. Instant exposure of Moscow PD being aware of the murders at that time. So, of course, we'll leak out footage we can manipulate and basically claim it's a white Hyundai Elantra to the public, and many were convinced. As for the neighbor's footage, we'll leak out a screenshot of the footage that doesn't reveal anything tangible to examine. The only thing that was key to that leak was the time of 1:56 a.m., which was the time Kaylee's sister claims the girls arrived back at home. Yet, the actual footage was never released to show them coming back at that time. They didn't even show that to verify the claims. Maybe they got back earlier or later. We wouldn't know, because that footage has never been released. And going back to that oddity, Kaylee's sister literally viewed this footage. So this means whoever allowed her access to it knew there wasn't a white Hyundai Elantra ever in that neighborhood. But the so-called FBI expert had to spot it from this camera, right? Get a clue? Surely we would have all seen a white Hyundai Elantra creeping into the neighborhood. Guess not. It's being, quote, saved for trial, along with all the other evidence against the defendant. Sure, why not? So, of course, the classic scratch of the head comes about with the following question. How is there a white Hyundai Elantra spotted, which would be alleged to be Kohberger's, yet there was never a white Hyundai Elantra spotted entering the neighborhood from the neighbor's camera? Yep, can't drive the vehicle without gas, my friends. And guess who's pointing out that the white Hyundai Elantra was edited into the surveillance to frame Kohberger? And guess who claimed the alleged 2011 to 2013 white Hyundai Elantra somehow just teleported to another country for fuck's sake? And guess who couldn't track this vehicle, who they claimed was the suspect, and somehow ended up tracking a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra instead? And guess who never explained how this actually happened? And guess who called them out on it? And guess who traced an outline of a white Hyundai Elantra and even wanted to prove Kohberger was in that Linda Lane surveillance? Yeah, we do not waste time in who and what we address. Something is suspicious and it immediately pops up on our radar. So we investigate that also. We have been digging into both sides all this time, I think people have forgotten this investigative work. But we also address elements of deception from any and everywhere. Maybe it's time for you guys to take a break. Have a moment to yourselves, your families, your friends, because the trial will continue to be delayed, and we will meet back up until then. Farewell for now. We will return to exposing everything and everyone. This is the Chaos Sector.